you develop on your workstation, right? You write this code on your workstation. Vanna here is showing you the workstation part of it. And you code it just like you would any other normal .NET application. And then you deploy your code to the device. And at that point in time, it's running on the device. You don't need a PC connection. You don't need anything anymore. It's running on the processor right here. This is an entirely self-contained unit. If you wanted to talk back to the PC or something, you can use Ethernet. You can use USB. You can use Wi-Fi. Serial, thank you. For those of you who has a serial port on their computer? Yeah, that's what I thought.
At least one of them.
Yeah, well, the person who had VB, I think, had a serial port.
Do not abuse the only VB person.
So you can talk back to computers using any of those different technologies, right? That's really good when you start doing things like Andrew has here, where you have helicopters and other stuff, where you wanted to wirelessly communicate back to a base station and send information back, while you have this microcontroller autonomously by itself controlling controlling the actual machine itself. Okay. Now, one thing that, and I'm going to just get this out there and open them again with one thing that you lose from this, one thing that's sort of a little bit difficult, because it's open, because there are so many different hardware platforms that it targets, the MicroFramework code is actually interpreted on these processors. It isn't JIT-compiled, right? So what that means is it's really good for a lot of the types of things we're going to show, really good for developing interfaces. It's quite frankly, it's more usable than you would think if you hear it's interpreted. However, if you're looking to develop, say like, I do a lot with synthesizers, and one of the things I tried early on was to have the microcontroller code create waveforms, right? And have those output out, but you have to be able to send out a bit once every 44,000th of a second. Too fast for in the case of the Netmfdevices, it was a 48 megahertz processor, right? Too fast for that. Now the Hydra. Yep, what's that?
Hydra is the forthcoming. So GHI Electronics is the maker of the boards that we're using. There's another manufacturer that's currently got a Gadgeteer board on the market. The only GHI one that's available right now is the Fez Spider, and the kit that Pete and I have is called the Fez Spider Starter Kit. The GHI folks are just releasing a new board called the Fez Hydra that's kind of in beta form. This guy here, and it moves from where the Fez Spider is a 70 megahertz processor. The Fez Hydra is a 240 megahertz processor, although they've got it clocked back to 200 just to keep it a little more less power hungry and more stable. So some of the stuff that we'll show you on the current gen would perform quite a bit faster on the Hydra board. There are some other differences in terms of which sockets are available and such, but and the thing that's great about the Hydra that they managed to make it faster and it's cheaper. Yeah. So that's a real good combination.
And this is actually another board by another manufacturer, because the Gadgeteer framework stuff is a specification that was initially developed by the MicroFramework team, led by the folks in Microsoft Research. So this is primarily out of Microsoft Research. So there's another vendor that's come out with their own set of modules and stuff. These guys are over in Britain. These two are by GHI. There's a company called Seed Studio with 3 E's. That has created a bunch of additional modules that you can connect to this, which we'll see some modules in a second. But it is an open standard. Now, what's really nice, what GHI has done with this one, the new Hydra, is they've also made it an open hardware standard. So everything about this, including, as Gus from there pointed out, their specific technique for how they tack on a ball grid array chip here, which if you've ever had to try and do any sort of surface mount soldering, a ball grid array is underneath this chip. There's, I forget, 200 little tiny balls underneath, and you need to find a way to attach those. They said all of that information as well is released as part of this open hardware spec. And that little symbol that you see right there is the symbol for open hardware. So we have open source software, we have open source hardware, which I think is a pretty nice thing to see. Not something you usually hear associated with Microsoft.
One of the other things that's really cool about the Gadgeteer specification in particular is that it also includes very detailed documentation in terms of module development. So if you get into this and you decide, well, there's not a module that fits my exact needs, you can breadboard something out. Pete did exactly this himself and blogged it, so you can check out his blog to see that. Sorry?
Thank you, sir.
I like the plug. But you can build your own modules based on the module specification. And all of that's open, and the forums at GHI are an extraordinary place to find people who have deep expertise in this. There's one guy who goes by the handle of Architect, who I think is working on his 3rd module now. And sort of makes me feel really tiny and small when I see the stuff that he's doing, but lots to learn.
So again, it's a standardized specification. The .NET Gadgeteer itself is not a product, but it's a specification, and other vendors go and create implementations of that specification. And the nice thing is, if they do it right, we all know there's chances that they'll do it wrong. But if they do it right, then all these modules can interconnect. There's no certification board or anything else like that. They need to just follow the spec. And if they do something wrong, like for example, they offer a power module and they don't make it red, because that's one of those parts of the spec, is power modules need to be red. Somebody from, from the folks over in Microsoft Cambridge, UK, who helped develop this, will probably give them a call and say, hey, you guys really should have done it red, but they're not going to go and force them to take it off the market or anything. It's all up to the vendors to
That is one of the key pieces to avoiding the magic blue smoke coming out, is not connecting your red modules to a place where they don't belong.
Yes. Already mentioned some of the things that I think why you might want to look at this. One of the things that I think really is compelling about this is we're all used. How many here? How many of you have less than 2 gigs of memory on your workstation, besides the BB guy? How many of you have less than 2 gigs? None of you, right? I mean, we have gotten to the point where we're used to coding against gigs and gigs and gigs of memory, lots of processor speed. Our usual approach is, if it's not working fast enough, chuck another server at it. If it's not working fast enough, add another processor or something. These things force you to kind of go back and rethink some of your development practices, where you have to work in a 72 megahertz board that has X K or X meg of memory. Some of these
16 megabytes.
These have 60 meg, which is pretty high. A lot of these other ones only have like 64K and 512 of flash and other stuff like that too. So it gets you to think about coding at a much tighter level. Thinking about how you allocate your variables and do a bunch of other stuff, because you want it to perform a little bit better. Also understanding that these are low power, understanding that you can access pins directly from your code. You're doing things kind of on the metal even though you're running in the framework. Again, it's an enjoyable part of the process, and I think it's kind of like the joy you get from, oh, this sounds funny. I say the joy you get from coding and assembly, but yeah, I can see it's kind of like that, only you get to use your .NET skills, which I think is pretty useful. It's not like a sales pitch, but
yeah. Now we understand your aversion to VB, because you like assembling.
Yeah, no, I'm not 100%.
Question, you can't engender compile library and put it on, it's still interpreted?
I mean, the teams are looking at some other ways to improve performance, but no, you have to think about it. What would you engend to? Imagine if desktops here ran 15 different incompatible processor families. You would have to write runtime compilers for each one of those, just like we're doing with ARM, to be able to get Windows 8 to run on ARM. It's a compiler effort, right? You have to do the same thing here.
Remember NT40, which ran on MIPS and all these other different PowerPC? Imagine if we had to write .NET for that. That would not have been fun.
What version of C# supported, and what language features are not available?
Well, I mean, MicroFramework is a subset in a big way, and the easiest way to find that out, you can actually download the .NET MicroFramework, Visual Studio Express for C#, all of those things you can download for free, and so you can just reference the assemblies from .NET MicroFramework and open them up in an object browser. That's probably the fastest way to see what all's there and what's not there compared to.
But can you use like reflection, generic serialization?
So generics I don't believe is there.
At least in 4.1, I don't believe there were generics. A lot of the classes have reduced API surface area. It's sort of like when you come from the full .NET framework and you code in Silverlight. Some of you have coded Silverlight stuff. You understand there's quite a bit of a subset of .NET there. Like you lost a lot of things. Well, this is pared down even further. But then there are additional things that are added on to support talking to microcontroller pins and whatnot. And really, we couldn't enumerate the differences. You would really just have to try it out, because you think about Last time I downloaded the full .NET framework, it was like 50 megs or something like that for the reduced footprint version. And if you think about something like this, where you've got 16 megs total on the machine, and you need to have most of that available for your own code, then it's going to be a little bit small. All right, so I'm going to show you here the basics of creating a Gadgeteer application very quickly. What do we have until like 5?
Until 5.
Yes, 5. Okay, good. I'm going to create a couple of things here in Gadgeteer just to show that off. Before I do that, though, I think I need to. Here, you want to talk for a second?
Sure. He's going to get a gear up.
I need to be appropriately dressed for screwing around with this stuff.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the processor itself. And as you can see here, the main board here is in the center. Each of these sockets is identical. All the sockets are 10-pin sockets. They have identical plugs. The ribbon plugs are interchangeable between all the modules. And that's one of the key pieces, is that you're never fumbling for the right cable for a particular module. All the modules are identical in terms of cables and such. The difference is, and you can probably see, well, it's kind of hard to see on here, each of the sockets is both numbered and also has letters. The letters will actually correspond to the letters on a given module. So for example, the Ethernet module is marked with an E in a square there. So the only socket that has the E is this socket 7. Right? So that's just one example here. It's basically you take your ribbon cable, you match up the letters, you plug and play. Pete will show you beyond that. Yeah, I thought you might have the white lab jacket.
Yeah,
I did, right? So, what's that? The butcher?
Yes.
Are you butchering electrons?
I am. This is actually just to protect me from all the crap that's going to blow up over here while I'm messing around.
All right. I'm stepping away from Pete because he's been known to make unfortunate things happen with electronics. So.
Speaking of unfortunate things, I actually think I need to go a little bit further here. And here we go.